Someone changes the way they speak to you, and something in you changes along with it. Not enough for you to admit it, but it's immediate. Your body notices, your mind starts interpreting, and suddenly you're no longer in the same state as before. You call it sensitivity. You tell yourself you just perceive more, that you just feel more deeply. But if that were all it was, you'd still be in control. The problem is that you're not. Small things carry disproportionate weight. A silence that lasts longer than usual, a shorter response, a different look, and that's already enough to completely change how you feel. No matter how much you try to rationalize it, the effect has already happened. Your internal state has already been adjusted by something external. Again. And the strangest part is that it feels normal. You look around and everyone lives like this, trying to maintain a certain balance that never lasts very long. So you assume that's just how it is, that the problem is simply learning to deal with it better, to be stronger, to not let things affect you so much. But what if it's not that? What if what you call sensitivity isn't a trait, but a pattern? Something you learned, repeated so many times that it became automatic, and that today is defining how you feel, how you react, and deep down, who you believe you are without even realizing it. You do not experience your emotions in isolation. They do not emerge from a stable internal core. Most of what you feel is a response, not to reality itself, but to subtle signals coming from other people. Tone of voice, rhythm, micro-expressions, silence. When you notice how you feel, the process is already complete. The reaction has already been chosen by you. What you call feeling something deeply is often a rapid interpretation that occurs below the level of consciousness. You are not experiencing an emotion, you are decoding a situation. The result of this decoding becomes your emotional state. That's why your feelings change so quickly depending on who you're with. Your internal state is externally referenced. This creates a dependency that doesn't look like dependency. There is no obvious attachment, no conscious need. Your emotional stability is constantly negotiated in real time based on feedback you don't control. You feel calm when things seem to be in harmony. You feel uneasy the moment something seems off. A shift in perception is enough to alter your entire state. Over time, this becomes normal. You stop questioning why your internal state is so easily influenced, because it has always worked this way. You interpret this as awareness, intuition, emotional depth. But what is actually happening is structural. Your emotions are not self-generated. They are triggered, shaped, and stabilized by something external to you. Most people assume they have a stable internal point from which they experience the world, a kind of psychological center that remains intact regardless of what happens around them. But if you pay close attention to your own reactions, that assumption begins to collapse. Your state changes too easily, too quickly, and too completely. A single interaction can reconfigure how you feel about yourself, your day, and even your sense of direction. That kind of volatility doesn't come from depth, it comes from the absence of a fixed center. When your emotional state has no internal anchor, it needs to organize itself around something external, and in most cases that something is other people. Their tone of voice becomes your signal. Their approval becomes your stability. Their distance becomes your uncertainty. You don't decide this consciously. It happens automatically, because without an internal point of reference, your system relies on external ones. This creates a condition in which you are never truly anchored. you are temporarily stabilized. There is a difference. Anchoring comes from within and remains even when external conditions change. Stabilization, on the other hand, is conditional. It depends on things remaining aligned, predictable and favorable. The moment that alignment breaks, even slightly, your state follows it. You don't lose control in a dramatic way. You shift, you adjust, you try to recover a balance that was never truly yours. The consequence is subtle but constant. You move through life in a state of ongoing dependency, always comparing yourself to something external. You may appear calm, functional, even confident. But underneath, your stability is being maintained, not earned. And anything that requires constant maintenance can be shaken at any moment. This is the instability most people learn to live with, without realizing that what they call emotional sensitivity is often just the absence of an internal center. The problem is not just reacting to other people, it's that at some point your own internal signals stopped being enough to guide you. What you feel on its own carries less weight than how it is received. You can have a clear impression of something, a thought, a reaction, a discomfort, and still hesitate, still wait, still look outside yourself for confirmation of its validity. That hesitation is not uncertainty. It is a learned distrust of your own perception. This shows up in ways that are easy to overlook. You sense that something shifts in a conversation, but instead of holding on to that perception, you start adjusting it. Maybe you misinterpreted it. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe you're overthinking. And so your original signal weakens because it wasn't reinforced. What replaces it is a more subdued and acceptable version, one that fits better with what the situation seems to require. Over time, this creates a hierarchy where the external consistently overrides internal awareness. What you feel becomes a draft, something provisional, something that needs to be checked with other people before it can be trusted. And when this becomes automatic, you stop relating to your own experience as something solid. It becomes flexible, negotiable, easily reshaped by whatever response comes from outside. The result is subtle but decisive. You no longer orient yourself by what you actually perceive, but by what is confirmed. And confirmation is unpredictable, inconsistent, and often delayed. As a result, your internal state never fully stabilizes. It remains open, waiting, dependent on something that was never meant to define it. That's where the dependency deepens, in the lack of authority your own perception has over what you allow yourself to feel. If this somehow feels familiar to you, it's because you are already seeing more than others allow themselves to see. That is what this channel was created for. Subscribe if you want to keep understanding what truly shapes your behavior behind the scenes. At a certain point, your experience of yourself stops being immediate. There is always an intermediate layer. Even in moments that should be simple, there is a subtle delay, as if you were checking your own reaction before allowing it to fully exist. This delay is so fast that you rarely notice it, but it completely changes the way you relate to yourself. Instead of having a direct connection with what you feel, you relate to it as something that needs to be managed. A reaction arises, and almost instantly another process begins, evaluating whether that reaction fits the situation, whether it is appropriate, whether it will produce the desired outcome. You are not just experiencing something, you are supervising it. And the more this becomes automatic, the less access you have to anything unfiltered. This creates a strange kind of distance. You are present, but not fully immersed in your own experience. Part of you is always outside of it, observing, making small corrections in real time. This distance makes you more functional in certain environments, but it also removes something essential. You stop trusting the raw experience. You trust the version of it that has been processed enough to be considered safe. Over time, this becomes your reference base. You don't question the distance because you don't remember what it feels like without it. But this is where a deeper form of dependency settles in. If you cannot access your own experience directly, you cannot trust it. And if you cannot trust it, something needs to take its place. That something is almost always external, and once this substitution is established, your sense of stability stops being something you carry with you. It becomes something you are constantly trying to rebuild. What you call having control over your emotions is often something completely different. You are not anchored, you are reacting. Your system is continuously modifying itself to maintain a certain level of social equilibrium. When things seem calm, you interpret that as control. But what is really happening is an adaptation to external conditions, not independence from them. This distinction is easy to miss because the regulation can look very refined. You don't explode, you don't lose your composure, you don't visibly destabilize. Instead, you adapt quickly. From the outside, this looks like emotional maturity. But internally, it often feels like maintenance, as if you were constantly adjusting small things to prevent something bigger from shifting. The problem is that regulation depends on precision. You have to interpret situations correctly, anticipate responses, and stay synchronized with what is expected. And since those expectations are never fully clear or stable, the process never truly ends. You are always, even if only slightly, engaged in keeping things right. This means your sense of control is conditional. It only holds as long as your adjustments remain effective. This creates a false sense of stability. You feel in control because you are not visibly overwhelmed, but your state is still being shaped externally, just in a more subtle and continuous way. True control would mean that your internal state remains intact, even when alignment breaks. What you have instead is precision in adaptation, and the more precise that adaptation becomes, the harder it is to notice that you still depend on something external to sustain it. There are moments when you feel completely fine, clear, stable, even confident. But if you pay close attention, these moments tend to happen under specific conditions. When interactions flow smoothly, when responses match what you expected, when there is no friction between how you see yourself and how others seem to respond to you. This alignment creates a sense of calm that feels internal, but does not come entirely from within. What stabilizes you in these moments is not just the situation itself, but the confirmation it provides. You see yourself reflected in a way that feels coherent. Your tone is received the way you intended. Your presence is welcomed without resistance. There is no need to question, adjust, or reinterpret, and because of that, your internal state settles. Because nothing is disturbing the image that is being reinforced externally. That is why even subtle misalignments can feel disproportionate. When the reflection changes, slightly colder, less engaged, harder to interpret, the coherence breaks. And when that happens, your system not only registers the change, but begins to search for what shifted. The question is not always conscious, but it is constant. What does this mean about me? That question is what destabilizes you, not the situation itself. Over time, this creates a dependence on being reflected in a specific way. You are not just interacting with people. You depend on them to confirm that you are still intact. And when that confirmation is inconsistent, your stability becomes inconsistent as well. That is where the dependency becomes structural. Your sense of identity stops being something you carry independently. It becomes something that needs to be continuously reflected for you to feel whole. There is a delay in your emotional clarity that you rarely question. You feel something, but it does not fully settle until there is some form of external confirmation, a reaction from another person, a coherent response, a signal that validates what you perceived. Until that happens, your own experience remains slightly uncertain, as if it has not fully formed yet. You are aware of it, but you do not fully trust it. This creates a subtle dependency to finalize your own internal state. Your emotions do not arrive complete. They arrive provisional. You hold them lightly, waiting to see if they make sense within the context of others' reactions. And if the reaction contradicts what you initially felt, your experience adjusts immediately. The original signal loses authority the moment something external challenges it. This reshapes how you relate to yourself. Your internal experience becomes something negotiable rather than definitive. You do not fully commit to what you feel because you have learned that it might be wrong, inappropriate, or misaligned. So instead of holding on to it, you keep the situation open, flexible, ready to be revised. This flexibility seems adaptive, but it comes at the cost of solidity. The result is that you rarely feel definitive. There is always the sense that something is still being determined, still being clarified, still waiting for confirmation. And in that space, your dependency deepens, because without their response, what you feel never fully becomes yours. You do not just interact with people, you use them in a way so subtle it goes unnoticed. Certain people calm you, others make you tense. Some give you a sense of clarity, others create confusion. These shifts seem like natural reactions to who they are, but over time they begin to form a pattern that has less to do with them and more to do with what they regulate in you. This creates invisible roles that people begin to occupy in your life, roles that your system depends on. One person becomes a source of safety, another becomes a source of pressure. Someone becomes a point of reference for whether you are okay or not. You do not think of them this way, but your emotional state begins to organize itself around their presence, their absence, and the way they respond to you. The dependency forms silently because it does not feel like a need. It feels like a preference, like comfort, like connection. You are drawn to certain interactions because of how they make you feel and avoid others for the same reason. But what is really happening is more structural. You are distributing parts of your emotional regulation across multiple external sources, instead of maintaining that regulation internally. This creates a system where your stability stops being self-sufficient. It spreads across people, interactions, and responses you do not control. When these elements are present and functioning the way your system expects, you feel balanced. When they are not, something shifts. And because these external points are constantly changing, your internal state never fully stabilizes. It remains dependent on a network of regulation that exists outside of you. There is a version of you that only exists in relation to something external. Remove the interaction, remove any form of response, and something in you becomes less defined. Not empty in a drastic way, but imprecise. As if the boundaries of your own experience depend on something external to become fully visible. That is why certain moments feel more difficult than they should. It's not conflict nor rejection, but absence. When nothing happens, when no one responds, when there is no signal to interpret or adapt to, there is a subtle loss of clarity. You are still present, but less oriented, less certain of what you feel, what you think, even what matters in that moment. This uncertainty usually disappears quickly, which is why it is rarely noticed. This creates a silent dependency on stimulation that is not about activity, but about definition. You do not interact just to experience the moment, you interact to become more concrete to yourself. Interaction sharpens your sense of who you are. Without it, things become vague enough to keep you moving back towards something that reflects you. The dependency here is not emotional in the obvious sense. It is structural. Your sense of identity does not fully stabilize on its own. It requires contact, response, friction, something that defines your boundaries from the outside. And when this becomes the pattern, being alone with yourself is not just quiet. It is incomplete in a way that is difficult to explain, and even harder to tolerate for long. I think what makes this difficult to notice is how functional everything seems from the outside. Nothing appears out of place. You can go about your day and even demonstrate self-awareness, and because of that, there is no clear moment when you stop and question this structure. It simply feels like this is who you are, that it has always been this way. But when you begin to pay attention in a more honest way, small things start to stand out. And I'm not talking about dramatic reactions, but rather the subtle dependencies, the way your mood shifts very easily, the way silence or distance create a kind of internal movement that does not fully belong to the present moment. And I don't think this is something that gets resolved by trying to control more. In fact, that tends to make it worse. The more you try to control your reactions, the more you remain within the same structure that created them. What seems to matter more is actually seeing the situation clearly, without trying to change it immediately. Because once you are able to see the pattern without adjusting it right away, something begins to separate, and it is in that separation that things begin to change. What all of this indicates is not a flaw or a delay in your personality, nor something as simple as being too sensitive. It is a structure, a way your internal state has been organized little by little around things that were never meant to define you. And because this structure developed gradually, it does not feel like something you adopted. It feels like something you are. But once you see this clearly, something shifts, whether you act on that shift or not. There is a difference between being inside a pattern and being aware that you are inside it. That awareness does not immediately solve anything, but it removes something that was previously invisible. And once something stops being invisible, it becomes harder to fully believe in it in the same way. The question is not whether you will stop being affected by people. You won't. The question is whether your entire internal state will continue to reorganize itself around them without you noticing. The question is whether you will want to keep going through the same situations that leave you uncomfortable. Because as long as that continues, your sense of stability will never fully belong to you. It will remain something dependent on conditions you do not control, and that is where the dependency continues, silently, every day. Think about it. Thank you for watching this video, and don't forget to subscribe to The Observer until the next discomfort.